I, a 31-year-old female, was adopted by my parents when they thought they couldn't have children for a while. Things were all right. I was adopted when I was 6, and I can't remember much from before my mom got pregnant with my younger brother Nick, a 23-year-old male. I was never outright mistreated, but she wasn't hesitant to make it clear that she had a favorite kid. I have to imagine that she treated me pretty well before her golden child came along. Nick was her miracle child. Yes, that's a direct quote. She called him that all the time. When I was young, I thought I understood what she meant by that. She struggled with fertility her adult life, and my parents had been convinced that they would never have a child of their own. Eventually, I figured out that he was their miracle because he was their biological child, the one they actually wanted. At least, that's what it seemed like to me. Nick got everything: new clothes, gadgets, school trips, while I was mostly stuck using hand-me-downs that came from my cousins. If I ever complained, I was told to suck it up and be grateful. She'd usually give me some excuse about how I was more independent and grown up than Nick, so I didn't need the extra attention that he got. I knew that was a load of crap, but I think Nick bought it. I remember him being a pretty normal kid, and we were close for a few years. But as we got older, a gap started growing between us. He got entitled, and my parents' doting made him spoiled, which made it tough for us to get along. Because my parents would always take his side whenever anything happened, I hate to say it, but I started to dislike him and we grew apart. Things really hit the peak when I was saving for college. I'd worked part-time through high school and managed to save up a decent chunk of money, and my parents promised to match it for my tuition. My mom had always made it clear that they weren't going to pay for my college. She insisted that she had done it herself and that she believed that was the proper way to do it. I tried to remind her that the economy wasn't in the gutter when she went to college, but she'd just give me one of those "you kids these days are so lazy" speeches. I didn't let the issue go so easily, and eventually, they promised to match whatever I could save. So I worked as hard as I could, saved nearly everything, and did my best in school so I'd have a higher chance of getting a good scholarship. I got into my dream school and let my mom know how much I'd saved, so she'd know how much she needed to match. That was when she dropped the bomb on me. She said they didn't have the money at the moment. I couldn't respond. I mean, I'd been making my plans based around that money for years now, and every time I asked her about it, she'd insist that the deal was still on. I was in disbelief. I wouldn't be able to afford my dream school anymore. My plans would have to change completely. I told her exactly that, but she was completely unmoved. She just said that I was a smart kid and that I would be able to figure out a way to deal with it myself. I couldn't believe how unfair she was being. She wouldn't tell me what they had spent the money on, but it was clearly more important than her child getting an education. They'd probably never been planning to help out at all. I was heartbroken. Here I was, counting on the one thing she'd promised me, out of all the times I'd been forced to settle for next to nothing. Instead, I'd been played. I couldn't believe I'd been stupid enough to actually trust her. Nothing I said could move her. She just sat there, responding slowly, like I was boring her. I ended up scrambling to make things work. I had to pick up a second job and needed to take out student loans. I didn't get into my dream college and I struggled a bit, but thanks to a lot of hard work and some scholarships, I managed to make it through. When I graduated, they didn't even bother to show up. It turned out my parents were on vacation in Europe with my brother. They'd known about my graduation. I'd been reminding them of the date for well over a year, but I wasn't important enough for them to consider coming for me or even inviting me on a trip with them. My time hustling for my tuition taught me a killer work ethic. I worked my butt off while I was in college and even after I left, managing to put together a decent online business. On good months, I could pull in several $1,000s from my store alone. Along with my day job, I made a good amount of money. It might be immature, but I rubbed my new success in my parents' faces. You know how they say the best revenge is a successful life? I totally believe in that. Feels good. I wasn't close with any of my family after all. They'd put me through so much. I moved out and rarely visited, and they never visited me. Nick and I talked occasionally, but it felt like it was more out of obligation than anything else. I think my success made my parents start to respect me more. My parents would occasionally call if they needed my input on something, and it seemed like they'd actually start to value my opinion. I still wasn't the perfect child, but they weren't openly critical of me anymore. They'd still take Nick on vacations without inviting me, or they'd buy him some expensive gift. Well, I got nothing, but I didn't really care at that point. I wasn't living under their roof anymore, and I'd committed to having a distant relationship with them. For the most part, this arrangement worked great for me. I can honestly say my parents and I started getting along better after I moved out of their house. That little no-involvement rule broke apart one day when my brother let it slip that my parents were going through some financial difficulties. My mom didn't earn much, and my dad had been laid off a while ago. They hadn't told me that, and I felt a little worried for them. My brother went on to explain that they couldn't keep up with their mortgage and were in danger of losing the house. I realized that I was in the best position to help, with my extra income from a successful business. So, I decided to start helping with the mortgage payments. It wasn't a steep enough payment to hurt me, and I really didn't want to see my family put out on the street, even if they had been horrible to me. My parents seemed grateful at the time, and I didn't think much of it. I had the payments automated, and eventually, I sort of forgot I was even paying their mortgage. Fast forward about half a year, and I got a call from my mom. There was no preamble, no pretense. She just came out and said she needed me to pay for Nick's education. I was speechless for a moment. I mean, she didn't even ask, it was a demand. I was also surprised that Nick had actually decided to go to college. Ever since he graduated from high school, he'd been taking a year to himself, and he'd been doing that for about 4 years now. I'd always assumed he'd keep putting it off indefinitely. I told her there was no way I'd be able to pay for his education. I pointed out that she'd left me high and dry when it was my turn. Nick had 4 years to save up and pay for his college. My mom sighed and told me to stop being petty. I was being petty, that was rich, she said. I struggled to get myself through college, and now she was asking me to pay her golden child's education, and I was petty for refusing. I said I wasn't being petty, that I was just being fair. It was unfair that I'd had to figure it all out myself, and they wanted me to cover him. I pointed out that I was already paying their mortgage and that I wasn't a millionaire or something. This would stretch my resources beyond what I was comfortable with. My mom laughed sarcastically and said that she knew I'd gotten a big head because I'd started making some money. Then she said that I was only paying their mortgage as a way of lording my success over them and keeping them under my thumb. I pointed out that they had been the ones to come to me about the mortgage, and that it wasn't fun paying that out every month. I told her I was trying to do it right by them, and she said, "But Nick isn't deserving of that." I ignored that. I knew she was just trying to get a rise out of me. I explained again that I wasn't happy about how she treated me when I wanted to start my education, and I told her that I couldn't continue covering the mortgage if I did this for them. That was when she blew up at me. She said, "I feel like I'm too good for all of them now, and I'm threatened by Nick's brilliance, which is why I don't want him to have a chance." I was done with the conversation, so I said, "If he's so brilliant, then he can get the money himself just like I did." I ended the call immediately and ignored the phone when she called back. So, am I the a-hole for refusing to pay for my brother's education? I know it's important, but I'm already doing a lot for them by paying the mortgage, and I still haven't gotten over how my mom didn't help when I was the one starting college. Honestly, your mom's asking you to do for Nick what she never did for you. Help pay for his education, even though you had to figure it out on your own. It's pretty unfair, especially since you've already been helping them with the mortgage. It sounds like she expects you to keep giving without ever acknowledging the double standard. You've done a lot for them already. There's no reason to stretch yourself further when they've never given you the support you needed. Update. It's been a few months since the phone call, and I've been forced to make some huge decisions. I got a lot of people asking me why I bothered to pay my parents' mortgage in the first place. Honestly, it was probably a bad idea, but at the time, I really felt like our relationship was on the mend. I was giving them a very last chance, and I'd resolved to myself that I would cut things off with them entirely if they pulled anything stupid again. Well, they pulled something stupid, all right. After my talk with my mom, I ghosted her for a few days. I didn't block her or anything. I just ignored her calls and messages. I just wanted her to get the idea that I didn't appreciate being looked at as an ATM, just for making the mistake of helping her once. Surprisingly, she was the one to step over the boundaries I'd set. She visited me at home one day, knocking loudly on my door and announcing herself so that it was impossible for me to ignore. I did try to, though, but it took about 5 minutes for the constant knocking to drive me crazy. When I opened the door for her, she barged in wordlessly before I could react to her invading my space like that. She said, "Finally, you're too good to talk to your mother." She didn't give me a chance to answer that either before she fired off into a rant about how it was my duty as a daughter to fund my brother's education. She mentioned that she had made countless sacrifices for me, and now it was my turn to make sacrifices for the family. I laughed in her face, cutting her off mid-rant. She looked at me like I was crazy, and realizing how mad that made her just left me satisfied. I milked the laugh though for all I could, just to piss her off a bit more. When I finally caught my breath, I told her that I didn't owe her or Nick a thing. I told her just how ridiculous it was that I had been made to cover my college myself, but now she was telling me it was my duty to put my brother through school. I'll never forget the exact words she said next. "You owe this family everything. You're lucky you were adopted at all." I won't lie, that cut right through me. It hurt enormously to hear those words, and it still hurts to remember them. At the same time, it made what I was about to do even easier for me. I'm still proud of myself for not reacting emotionally to that and letting her see how much it bothered me. I told her that I was sorry if she felt that way, and that if she preferred to be with her miracle child, then the three of them could figure out his tuition and the mortgage on their own. She jolted like she was electrocuted. She asked if I was saying that I wouldn't pay the mortgage anymore. I just nodded. She switched up instantly, going from angry to panicked in a second, and she tried to backtrack. She said I didn't need to be extreme and that we could talk about this. I pointed out that she was the one who had gotten extreme first. What type of mother tells their child she was lucky to be adopted? She started apologizing for what she'd said, but it was too little, too late. She was only apologizing because she realized she'd thrown away her meal ticket. I didn't budge a bit. I repeated what she told me, that I owed them because they'd adopted me. I told her that it was a choice they'd made, and that it was a poor excuse for the years of terrible treatment I'd endured from them. I told her that I was done being their second choice and that I'd rather not be a choice at all. I left a silence after that, hoping my mom would get what I was implying. There I was, done being their backup child. Instead, the first thing she said was, "But we won't be able to pay the mortgage without you." That was when a realization hit me like a switch being flipped. I thought my relationship with my parents had been improving, but they'd just been enjoying my money. I felt stupid for just realizing it. I'm sure it was obvious to you guys reading right away, but it's easy to delude yourself when you're personally involved. I'd been hopefully optimistic that they were changing slowly, but they were just tolerating me enough to get what they wanted from me. I think that was the final straw for me. I didn't answer her question. I didn't give her any comebacks. I just told her to get out of my house and never come back. She said I was being rash, and she begged me not to make any hasty decisions I'd regret later. I told her this was years overdue. I'd been hoping one day I'd be as important to them as Nick was, or that they'd even just give me some basic respect. Now, I saw it was never going to happen, and I wanted nothing to do with them anymore. My mom didn't leave immediately. It took me getting threatening to get the police involved before she finally agreed to leave. The whole time, she pleaded with me to reconsider. She even said she'd get Nick to talk to me. I didn't care. As soon as she left, I blocked all their phone numbers and got in touch with my bank to cancel the automated mortgage payments. The weeks that followed were rough. My family couldn't reach me, but they did come around a few more times. I never opened the door to talk to them, though, and they would eventually leave when they got tired of knocking. It got so bothersome that I had to stay at a hotel for a while. Eventually, they realized that I wasn't at home anymore because they came to confront me at work this time. My dad and my brother came without my mom. They practically jumped out at me as I was walking to my car. I was shocked for a moment, but I ignored them and quickened my pace to my car. Nick sprinted ahead of me and blocked my path. He told me to hear them out. My dad caught up with us and said that my mom was sorry for what she'd said to me. I tried to walk past them, but Nick moved to block me again. I couldn't get past him since he was faster than me, but I didn't want to talk to them, either. Eventually, I got so frustrated that I couldn't hold the silent act anymore. I told them that she wasn't sorry, or she'd be here right now. Nick said she didn't come with them because she knew I didn't want to see her. He repeated that she was sorry, but I cut him off and told him that her offenses, and both of my parents' offenses, went back much further than that. My dad couldn't meet my eyes after I said that. I told Nick that I hoped he managed to figure out his education as I did, but I wouldn't be in contact with him any further, because it meant my parents would still have a means of contacting me. I tried to walk away again, but my dad grabbed my arm and said I was overreacting. Something about the strength of my dad's grip frightened me, and I told him I would scream if he didn't let go. I meant it too. I tried to pull away again, but he maintained his grip. I was already inhaling to shout, but he let go once Nick stepped out of my way and held his arm. I drove away and went in circles for nearly an hour, just to make sure they didn't follow me back to the hotel. After that encounter, I was paranoid for a while. I took time off from work and wouldn't leave my room unless I absolutely had to. To do so, I would watch my back when I was out and move in circles before heading to the hotel. I was completely paranoid that they would find me. Once, I even had a small panic attack, thinking they'd get a private detective to track me down, before I realized that it would cost more money than they probably had at the moment. Going no contact with them meant that I'd have to leave behind all means of contact that they had with me. I'm not much of a social media person, so that wasn't a problem. I put in a request for a transfer and made sure my coworkers knew not to answer any questions about where I was moving to. I'm currently in the process of moving out of town and will make sure that none of my relatives know where I live, not even the few cousins that I actually like. It feels weird to willingly leave my family like this, especially considering I was adopted in the first place. But the truth is, I don't think I ever belonged. My parents certainly didn't think I belonged, and that's what really put a wedge between me and them. I don't care what happens to them now. It's not my problem. As far as I know, from what my cousin has told me, Nick wasn't able to start with the current academic school year, and my family has moved out of the old house. It seems they told everyone it was because of old, but I know the truth, and it gives me some measure of satisfaction. I've considered picking up the house for myself when it's back on the market, but I don't want to do anything that will bring me near those people ever again. Maybe I'll set it up as a rental, who knows? The moment your mom crossed that line with what she said about you being lucky to be adopted, that's a gut punch. I can only imagine how much it must have hurt. It's clear that you've been treated unfairly for a long time, and as hard as it is to walk away, it's probably the healthiest thing for you, OP. What would you have done?